Diary, hello, it's the middle of May 2021 and today we're going to look at the Cromemco Z2 computer, which I still think is a pretty handsome computer, about 40 years after I purchased it in about 1980. So this is going to be a description of the standard machine and then some of the modifications that have been made to keep it running in the 21st century. So as you can see, it's a large square black metal box, and Cromemco is one of the famous vendors of computers in the 1980s who made S100 based computers. So what does that actually mean? Well, an S100 based computer is simply, top off, a computer with a passive backplane. So there's a number of slots here, and each one of these slots has got a card edge connector at the back, and that's got 100 connections on it, and that's how it came to be called the S100 series bus computer. Now, on S100 bus computers, there's no motherboard. The actual CPU card is just another card. So on this machine, we've got from right to left, we've got the XPU card here, which is a 68000 and Z80 combined card. We've got some memory cards here, and quite high density for the time. Again, this is a 1980s system, this is a 40-year-old system. We've got the hard disk controller card here, and we've got the floppy disk controller here. Now, the way that Cromemco systems had always worked is that the disk controller card, this is called a 64 FDC. We started off in the earlier days with the 4 FDC, then it went to the 16 FDC, then the 64 FDC, and the last of the line was the 64 FDC-X. So all of these disk controller cards have a serial port on the actual disk controller card here. So via that ribbon cable, that goes to the back here, and as you can see from the inside of the case, there's a whole smorgasbord of these sockets here, all of which could have serial or parallel interfaces. So the idea was that this machine could actually support multiple users. At the very least, as a productive person when I was growing up earlier, I'd have at least 2 terminals on this particular computer system. So I'd have a console port and a second terminal, so I could oscillate between the 2 terminals doing things more productively. Let's look at the actual front of the machine. So the front of the machine is non-standard. There used to be, as standard, you'd get 2 bays for full height, full width, 5 1/4 inch media, and that would typically be 2 floppy diskette drives. So in the early 80s, hard drives were too expensive for most people to afford. Cromemco was a very high-end manufacturer, so they did actually provide one of the first hard drive solutions ever using an IMI 11 megabyte drive, and there was a version of this computer called the Z2H, H for hard drive, in which, I never had one, in which they managed to shoehorn in this hard drive. I guess it fitted in here somehow, but that was using a dedicated disk controller card, and the interface was not the popularized MFM hard drive interface that IBM in fact used with its original IBM PC hard drive systems, like the XT286 for example. So there we have it, there's the computer. As you can see, it's pretty solid. You couldn't really pick this up and walk around with it, even for just about 5 or 10 meters. You'd be putting it down. It's certainly at least 40 or 50 kilos, I would say, in terms of weight. This is a particularly rack-mounted system. They had other systems, but this was, ironically, the Z2, which came out at the end of the 70s, had a much longer life, I would say, than any of the other designs, because it formed the basis for some of Cromemco's most expensive systems. So there was, I think there was a Z1 originally. That was quickly replaced by the Z2. So the Z2 was available at the end of the 70s. Then they had a much kind of grander or posher system called the System 3. And the System 3 was what you bought if you really had the money. The Z2 was more like a workhorse, and it could be put into a standard 19-inch rack. So this system for us, for example, was in a 19-inch rack for some time, and later on I had this as a personal system, not in a 19-inch rack. But it did survive quite a long time, and this design went on to be the sort of boilerplate for the CS200 series of systems, which infamously were sold to the Navy in the US. So Cromemco were always a high-end manufacturer, but when they got the Navy contract, and that was in the late 80s, they were able to charge literally tens of thousands of pounds for this chassis in a slightly more beefed up fashion. So this design, this physical design, was an absolute winner. So let's just finish off by saying some of the mods that have been made to this machine. Well, the original power supply is a linear power supply. So we have a look at the back there. Standard power supply with a rectifier. I've managed to nestle in there on the left-hand side. You'll see there's a PC power supply here. And that's used for all 5 and 12 volt rails on this system. Just to give the original linear power supply a bit of a fighting chance to keep going. So there's very little stress on the original power supply now, I would say. So all the media is driven off the PC power supply, as is the new super quiet fan that was mounted just the other day. So there's a Noctua super cool and quiet fan has now been installed. So the rattling has now finally stopped, and the machine room aircraft taking off sound has now stopped. And also in the front, there's now no real sign of any hard drive, because this card here, not easily seen, but the card here is actually a Guesswine MFM hard drive emulator. So that's got a little Linux computer on board which simulates a hard drive, and that feeds those ribbon cables here are the cables from the hard drive controller into this unit here, which is pretending to be a hard drive. And the other really cool factor on this computer is that this is the HXC floppy emulator. Now this is a very clever product which can emulate 2 floppy drives, and you can see I've got the A drive and the C drive are on here. And for legacy and moving data around, I've got the B drive and the D drive here. This is a very clever drive. This is a B drive, 3.5-inch drive, which Cromemco never had, but we've been able to, by changing some of the circuitry, make that look like an 8-inch drive. So the Cromemco System 2, this Z2, always had 5.25-inch drives, which wasn't ideal, because the best you could do was have a 5.25-inch drive, which was double-sided, double density, and that would give you 360 kilobytes of disk space. But the Cromemco System 3, with its 8-inch drives, could have, each 8-inch drive could, if it was double-sided and double density, give you 1.2 megabytes of disk space, and a System 3 could have up to 4 of those drives. So in the early days, the System 3 had a huge amount more disk space, floppy disk space, than the Z2. Of course, all these limitations melted magically away once hard drives became possible, but that didn't happen till I would say the mid-1980s, and these computers started off in the late 70s. So in the late 70s, if you had the money, you'd buy a Cromemco System 3, because it had up to 4 1.2 megabyte drives, giving you a whopping 4-point-something megabytes of disk space, which was really a huge advantage. This device could only have 2 360K drives, so it was really a much less capable machine until the advent of hard drives. And today, in the 21st century, with the Guesswine emulator here, I've got greater than 100 megabyte hard drive emulated there. So this totally makes this system the best of all worlds, really, because the System 3 these days, if you have floppy drives, you probably wouldn't really use them. You'd use a hard drive emulator or hard drive itself. Okay, so that concludes the Z2 walkthrough. I'll be doing a boot sequence video soon, so look out for that. Okay, thanks for watching.